chapter 5 is entitled Shame, Violence, and Individualism. In the earlier chapters, we unpack the significance of the connection between shame and violence. So here's where we're adding in the importance of individualism in how we grapple with those realities or don't grapple with them, particularly in the United States, which many would argue is perhaps the most individualist society that's ever existed on the face of the earth.
Right.
We're really pushing our rugged individualism to some extremes here. And that has significant impacts on how we deal with violence. Just a few statistics. The United States is 3 times more violent than the next most violent industrialized nation, which is Northern Ireland. Not a place particularly known for tranquility, right? But we're 3 times more violent than that. We also incarcerate fully 25% of all of the world's imprisoned people.
Even though we only have 4 or 5% of the world's population.
Right. It's hugely disproportionate. So even if we just look at those 2 statistics, we can see that something's not quite right. Something's not working in the way that we're trying to approach violence. And I think the way that we're even just understanding what violence is in the first place. Because we have a hard time grappling with these communal and these social realities and with understanding why certain people become violent while others don't, right? And this really impacts the way that we look at our theology too. Our theology, I think, is also limited by individualism. And the way that those limitations happen makes it hard for us to see how the gospel and how scripture speaks really, really powerfully to violence and to those big questions that we're asking about what's going on in our world and in our country.
Yeah, normally we think of the gospel as speaking to me as an individual. And that's pretty much it. Of course, the gospel does speak to me as an individual. I don't want to minimize that. But in the scriptures, and here in Ephesians 2, we see a gospel that is spoken to the community. The little word you in the letter to the Ephesians is always the plural you. In Ephesians 2, between verses 11 to 22, that speaks about the effects of the work of the cross, specifically between verses 13 and 17, of what the cross accomplishes in the community, and that Christ is preaching peace to the community. So there's something more beautiful and more robust to the gospel than perhaps what we have heard in our own tradition, in our own evangelical background, perhaps even in much of Western theology.
And that's just really one example of the ways that our translation traditions and just the limitations of English, but then also kind of our individualist lens changes radically the way that we look at Ephesians, which we will also discuss in this book, some of the Greek and other things in there that are really, really important for us not to miss as we try to address this problem of violence as God's people.